I'd love to introduce our guests. We're thrilled to have two guests to discuss the 4 C's of change communications: convey clarity and confidence in uncertain times. Yes, we do love alliteration here. First up, please welcome Mary Lou Panzano. Mary Lou, please turn your camera on and say hello so I know you're there.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Brian.
Hi, glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Mary Lou is the former VP of Internal Communications at Bayer and Pfizer. She's also the former Director of Communications at Prudential. Amazing. She'll dig into her background a little bit more once she takes it away. Also here is Alex Borchard. Alex, please say hello to everybody.
Hi, everyone. Looking forward to our session together.
Glad to have you here. Thank you so much. A few voices in the room for the first 30 minutes. There's going to be a lot of information. It's going to go fast and furious, so keep that in mind. And for those of you who are worried about keeping up, don't worry, we'll also be sending you a recording for today's event. Alex is the Director of Internal Communications at Daiichi Sankyo. Did I get that right?
You did. Good job.
Wonderful. Here's what they're going to be covering today. I'm going to walk through the agenda real quick and then I'll be quiet, I promise. They're going to address a major problem that we're all facing as communicators, why 70% of change initiatives fail. And then they're going to outline the 4 C's of change framework to solve that problem for you.
Great. Terrific. Thanks for that introduction, Brian. And it's so great to be here. And I'm so happy that we have our bonus guest with us, Alex. She and I work together at Bayer, and we're going to talk about a couple of case studies as part of this change conversation today. As Brian mentioned, I am the former vice president of internal communications at Bayer and spent 30 plus years in employee communications throughout my career. And not one day went by as I started to cut my teeth in communications that I was not also handling major change programs. So I've learned a couple of things about how to make this work. But I think when I retired and I knew I wanted to talk and train about this and coach on it, it came really clear to me as I started to do some research that I learned that 70% of major change initiatives that companies try to implement actually fail. And this was a Forbes article back in October of 2022. And I just thought that that number was just a remarkably high number. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I'm going to talk through them in now, and then we'll talk about this change framework that Brian mentioned, and then we'll go through a case study. So the first reason is that most of the time that these programs fail, it's because employees are unsure and they're not clear about what the change is. They don't know what the change is about. They don't necessarily understand or agree with why it needs to be made. They're not sure what the outcome needs to be, and they're not clear about what the vision of the future is. So this all impacts them. What they know today is going to be different from what they may need to know and do tomorrow. And so one of the reasons is that lack of clarity is one of the major reasons why change initiatives fail. Another one, and I found this really interesting, and I thought about this from my own career perspective, is that employees have a strong affiliation to their company, their purpose, the work they do every day. They spend most of their waking hours at work, and many of them have friends even at work. So if a change comes in and disrupts that affiliation for them, they become unreceptive. They're like, no, like la la la, I don't want to hear about it because you're kind of messing with my affiliation with my company and with my friends, because change will impact most people and not always in a positive way. So there's that. And then leaders often are dealing with trying to set the organization up for growth in the future. And they are sort of thinking about that up here. They're looking at the environment, the competitive landscape. They're looking at the marketplace, what customers need, but they don't necessarily care enough about what employees think about what the problems are that the company is facing. So if leaders are not really clear and transparent about what that problem is and don't care enough to invite their employees to help solve it, then that transparency becomes a lack of caring from the point of view of the employees. Like, they're making the change anyway, don't really care what we think about it, and haven't asked us how we can help solve the problem. And then the last one is that generally people are just uncomfortable with change. Leaders, especially very senior leaders, are very comfortable with change. They step out of their comfort zone all the time. They're risk takers. They're thinking about 2 or 3 steps ahead on a regular basis. Most employees are not there. Most employees are not interested in making change. They're uncomfortable with change. And many of them are fear what the change is going to be, and they may not even have the courage to take that change on. So you may have heard some themes as I was talking about this, and those themes are clarity, lack of connection, lack of caring, and lack of courage. So the same four themes that I just mentioned to you, which are driving why change initiatives fail, are the same four themes if you flip it the other way and strategize and plan and apply some of the framework and the behaviors I'm going to talk about in a minute, then there's a way to flip this trend as well. So let me talk you through the 4Cs change work framework very quickly. This is something that I came up with about 10 years ago when I was faced with a major change program that I was dealing with at Bayer. And it was the time when Alex was there, was a major change affecting our site. We were consolidating a number of sites into one. And I needed to speak about this at a large conference, and I didn't know how to take 2.5 years worth of change work and put it together in a nutshell. And the more I thought about it, this framework came to mind. So I want to share it with you today so that you have some understanding of what it is. So around clarity, this may sound like a very simple thing, but know and stick to your goal is one of the hardest things that you need to deal with as communications professionals when you're helping to develop the strategy around the plan. But also, most of the time, you're representing the communications function on change management teams. And some of these teams get really big. And some of these projects, many of them are many-year projects, or at least multi-year projects. They don't start today and end tonight. So as you go through this process, knowing what the goal is, being crystal clear around it, and sticking to it is one of the biggest challenges you'll have dealing with your communications work when you're trying to pull together your plans and your strategies around this. The second big C is connection. So now fully understand that communicators do not always have the ability to bring a lot of people under the hood when they first learn about a major change, because it's often confidential. Alex and I are going to talk about that in the case study in a minute. But to the degree and the extent that you can engage and involve others in helping you develop your change communication strategy, the better off you're going to be. One of the things I can tell you is that oftentimes leaders feel like employees are concerned about problem A over here. And if you would engage and involve others through your connections, I mean, the communications group has probably the largest network than most other functions do who are involved in a major change. Take advantage of that, because while you might think people are solving for problem A or trying to help people deal with a concern that they're worried about over on one side of the house, chances are there's another underlying problem that you can help solve on the communication side that may be a blind site for leaders. So pay attention to that and use and engage, involve others. And these are not just employees, these are other stakeholders, because I recognize that some of you have stakeholders outside the organization. But remember, your employees are your biggest ambassadors here. So engage and involve them when you can. Speaking of your biggest ambassadors, caring is the third C. Now, this one may sound a little wonky, but at the end of the day, how you treat your people is how they're going to react for you. You need to have some empathy, and you need to care about the impact that the change is going to have on the people who the change is affecting. And this may sound like something that's like, of course, Mary Lou, but I've heard many, many, many stories about how people were treated on their way out of a company or while they were in a company. And if you lead with heart, you're going to have a better chance in not only what you say in your communications planning, but in actually what you do. You have to demonstrate caring in a way that's meaningful for our people. And then the last C, and we're going to dive into this one a little bit, is courage. None of these other C's matter at all if you don't do anything about it, if you don't take some risks, and if you don't do what I call the right thing, like make the right decisions and informed decisions, because nothing happens if nothing happens. Like, you've got to have the courage to get the resources and the actions in play that you need in order to make your change project work. So that's a high-level piece of the framework. One of the things I wanted to mention to you is that when I developed this framework, there's also a series of, I call them principles of prosperity, actually, that sit underneath each of these. Each one has 2 or 3. And I want to dive into the one for a minute on courage, because I think it's just a really important thing to note. And it's something we'll mention in the case studies that I'll get to in a second. And that is, you have to bury the words "I can't." If you think you can, and you think you can't, you are right. It's what you think about. So if you think you can't do something, you're gonna have these limiting beliefs, and you're not going to open your mind to how you can get things done. So one of the things we did in the case study I'm going to share with you is we asked ourselves, why can't we? because we needed to take some pretty draconian steps to make this change project work for us. So now let me get into the case study. We are, to give a little bit of background, you can see the date on this was January 15th of 2019. We announced that we were going to be closing our site, Bayer's site in Robinson, Pennsylvania, that's just outside of Pittsburgh, where Bayer had been for more than 100 years. Our high-tech material science business was there. It was carved out, but they stayed there. So from an economic perspective and from an employee's perspective, even though they weren't part of Bayer, they were still staying at the same site. But there were 600 people who were located there in groups like the HR Service Center, IT, our main data center for the United States was based there. Our IT stacks were based there. Large groups like compliance, legal, and talent development and recruiting and groups like that. So of these 600 positions that were located there, they were all going to be eliminated. And the plus 2,400 colleagues were the domino effect of other people who were either going to be taking on some of those roles, who were going to be training people who were in other parts of the country, other parts of the world, who were going to be picking up some of this work. What's special about this particular project, and the reason I picked this project, was because I've been hearing a lot in the news lately about how some companies have been letting go hundreds and thousands of people. And this was something that was actually symbolic for us at Bayer, because it was the first of what would then become and what would be viewed as shoes to drop as a result of the acquisition of Monsanto, which closed in August of the previous year. So as part of the integration work related to that, this was the first US site that was going to have a major change like this, and we were closing the site. This site also used to be a very important beacon in the community. And it used to be the US headquarters, the corporate headquarters for Bayer. So a lot of change was going to be happening. And this was a very symbolic, almost like a end of an era kind of change. It was really important for us, and I'm going to get into the model in a second and how we use the framework to deal with these three main challenges. And they fall under the courage bucket, essentially, was how are we going to prep our people, how are we going to protect our people, and how are we going to perform and make sure that we do this the right way for everyone. So as part of the prep work, we had about 20 senior leaders who were responsible for those groups that were based in Pittsburgh, and they were not all based in Pittsburgh. In fact, some of them were impacted by this, and their jobs were also going to be going away or transitioning in some other way. So we had 20 senior leaders in multiple locations. We had the communications team, HR, legal, we needed to bring in on this, how are we going to handle the media, elected officials. I don't know about you, but no elected official wants to hear that 600 jobs are going away in one of their communities. How are we going to prep the production team to help us make this thing happen? And remember, keep everything confidential, which I'll get to in the next bucket. And then how are we going to go through the scenarios about what could happen and how do we prep for it? So that was the prep piece. On the protect piece, it was crystal clear, when you go back to clarity, crystal clear that we wanted our main goal to be our employees hear from us first. Now, we had to keep this news confidential because, frankly, news would leak a lot out of Bayer. And we knew that this was an important message, and we wanted to make sure we controlled the message. We also wanted to make sure that our leaders were so well prepped that they had a level of credibility that they could not only handle this for their employees, but they had to deal with this change themselves. Because like I said, many of them were impacted. And then we already started to see some hits on our reputation, some tarnishing of the reputation just as a result of the acquisition of Monsanto the year before. And we didn't want to see that further tarnish. And then on the performance end, there are partners that you need to be very close with and have trusted relationships with if you're in a communications function, the facilities team, security, logistics, going through the rehearsal and making sure that we pull this thing off flawlessly. So these were the three main challenges. Now, under this cover and remembering our goal, clarity and connection and caring and courage, how are we going to handle all of this? We decided to do something very, very draconian. The big risk that I took was I said to my boss, I said, there is no way that these people, all of these leaders and all of these support teams around them are going to get this material electronically before we're ready to give it to them. Because as much as we want to trust them that they won't share it, they love the people on their team and they're going to share it with one or two other people, and we're not going to be able to contain the news. So we went old school. We brought them together physically in a hotel. We had a project name for it. Alex can talk a little bit more about this in a minute. And we gave everybody hard copies in the room of all of the materials. And I took them through from start to finish, how the entire rollout was going to go from the day before, which is where we were at, to several days later, because we did the town hall with the announcement. There were many conversations after that. We went through everything with painstaking detail. We answered every question. We changed the materials. We made the changes on the fly. And then we gave everybody hard copies that night before they went to bed in their hotel rooms. And I'm not making that up. We did not give anybody anything electronically until the day that the town hall started. And then we sent them all the materials electronically. Protecting, very important that we keep the message and our employees first. This is my team. I insisted, talk about taking a risk. I insisted that my team be in Pittsburgh with me to help make this thing work. Each one of them interfaced with one of those senior leaders, and that was their comms business partner. And it was really important that they were not only there to see all this work, hear everything, the conversation, because then they were then going to be the comms liaison for all of the follow through that was going to happen after that for the next couple of days. And then performing flawlessly. This was our president, Phil Blake, who had to get up and share this news. But then there were many conversations after that personally that were held with each of our employees. So those were the three big risks that we took in Pittsburgh. And now I'm going to hand it off to Alex. Alex, I'll advance for you what she did just a couple of weeks later.
Yes, so communicating the closing of our Edison Lake site was probably one of the hardest things that I've had to do in my career. It's never fun to deliver this type of news to the people that you work with and that you care about. So I just wanted to start by sharing some background and context. Bayer's presence in Edison Lakes went as far back as 1884. So as you can imagine, there was a long history and pride within the company. We knew that this would be a big hit to the 194 employees and the community. Also, this specific site handled end-to-end customer experience, including all the customer orders. So we had to execute this well. Otherwise, it could have had significant negative impact on our business and our reputation. And as part of our rationale for the site closure, we had to tell employees that we were moving to a shared service center in Costa Rica and a more global integrated approach. On the next slide, I'll share what we did to prep, protect, and perform. In the prep category, our approach was very similar to the Pittsburgh closure, having just gone through that. This time we had to prep 12 senior leaders. Most of them would be impacted themselves, and some were based outside of Edison Lakes, but had employees who were located at the site. We developed a very comprehensive briefing packet and plan that detailed by the minute how we were going to execute on this. And we gave leaders the tools to help them communicate and manage through the change. And this was all about providing that final clarity. We all came together physically to review the plan in detail the morning of the announcement, which was planned for 3 p.m. And as far as connections, comms, HR, and legal were in lockstep. And together we were all connected and aligned on what was expected. And our external comms and government relations partners identified media and local elected officials who we had a great relationship with and proactively handled that outreach. So bringing all employees together to announce the news was very important to us. Since the site couldn't accommodate the total employees, we rented space at a local hotel and coordinated with our AV production team to stream this virtually to some remote employees who were based in Edison Lakes and also impacted. In the protect category, we put employees first in everything we did. We knew we had to provide support immediately following the announcement, and we worked with our HR partners to provide EAP services. This was all ready to go. We also gave them time off and acknowledged the difficulty of this news and the time needed to process this. In terms of confidentiality, at the start of this project, we came up with a project name to keep things discreet, especially with admins managing calendars and all the planning meetings. So this was really important to us. And it was called Project Voyager and not Site Closing Team, right? Something small, but important to think about. Also for confidentiality, we didn't send the calendar invitation for our event days ahead. that would have resulted in speculation. Instead, we sent it at 10:30 a.m. for a 3 p.m. mandatory town hall. There was an 18-month transition. Our US president announced the news with great care, first acknowledging the very difficult decision that was made and then the rationale. He reassured them that nothing sudden was going to happen. Instead, that we would transition operations in a very thoughtful manner over an 18-month period to give everyone ample time for a smooth transition for both the business and for colleagues. And remember, this team was responsible for customer orders. The leadership team knew the importance of working together to ensure the business and service levels were protected and maintained as we moved services and work to a shared service center. The site closure coincided with the end of our lease for the site, which was August 31st, 2020. Sadly, this was during COVID. We had planned to do a special farewell, but couldn't at that point. For leader credibility, there was a project plan to ensure key decisions were made and communicated to employees every quarter, if not more frequently. Our president set this expectation and leaders delivered on it. And regarding reputation, feedback and comments reaffirmed that we executed in the right manner with care and respect and fairness, and we took care of employees through severance. In the perform category, transparent communication was critical. I mentioned the expectations of leaders was to deliver a thoughtful transition plan, and we communicated updates to employees every quarter, including what this meant for them. We ensured transparent communications every step of the way. And we were training to transition. So teams were transitioning in waves, and we had to train employees from the shared service center in Costa Rica. So imagine what that felt like, having to train someone to take over your job. Everything had to be done with great care. So in closing, while it was difficult to close a chapter of Bayer's history, there was great professionalism and integrity of everyone who was involved. My colleagues and I are really proud of how we handled it all, and it started at the top, which was leading with heart. And one last point that I want to make, for those of you who are leading this type of change, consider how that you can get your team involved and give them ownership, because this will build their skills and their confidence. Mary Lou threw a lot of change projects at me before I was ready. I wondered, why me? I'm not ready. I don't have the skills. Well, there's no better way to learn than to get thrown in. So thank you, Mary Lou. And I hope this was helpful. I'll turn it over back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Alex sent me a thank you note not long after she moved on to a different area, I believe it was. And she said, you know, I went from why me to why not me. And I think one of the things that I enjoyed the most about my role was being able to watch my team grow and develop and become even better, stronger, and be their best selves. And that's what I'm here to do in my retirement years and my semi-retirement years as I continue to train on this. But just to recap very quickly, in these two cases, and they really followed the same model, it was around employees first, control the message, make sure our leaders and all the teams who you need support with are involved and engaged in the process with you. And by the way, those relationships started months and years prior. If you don't know the names of the people who handle security and facilities, get to know who they are, because they are your friends, and you need to know what kind of beer they drink, because it's really important to have those kinds of relationships across the organization. Being respectful, being personal, being supported. You know, we didn't find a single situation where there was a litigation matter, an employment law matter. You know, social media was well contained. There were, you know, people may not have liked what happened, but they didn't complain about how they were treated, because they were treated as human beings and treated with respect and with great care. And then just the prepping, the protection, and the performance was just the way we did this was very different. And in fact, the global head of our Monsanto integration program, which was a huge mammoth program, said to us that we set a new standard for how site closings and how, you know, downsizing communications will be handled in the company, because these were so well done. So I don't think we could have asked for anything more to come out of that. So with that, I am just going to do a very quick recap. You know, 70% of these programs fail, and you know the reasons why, but now you also have a framework for how you can combat it and how you can mitigate those things. So I ask you to use the change framework. I mentioned one of the principles around burying the words I can't. I will show you my website in a minute. You can go find the other 10 that support these, because the framework is like the skeleton, but the principles, your behaviors and how you apply them really do matter. And they are like the muscles behind the skeleton. The skeleton can't move unless it's got muscles there. So the principles helped you do that. And then I ask you to pay it forward. I'm on a mission here, and Alex is with me, that, we don't want to be the communications people that are helping 70% of our change programs fail. We want to flip the narrative here. We want to be the ones that are helping 70 or more percent succeed. So share this framework with other people on your teams. I'm happy to come talk with any of you about how you can apply it to the work you're doing today. And that's my next gift to you, is that today only, until midnight, anyone who's listening in, feel free to drop me a Calendly. My Calendly link is here. I'm happy to give you a 30-minute free change communications consult. And then I also have some 4Cs fundamentals and tips for you available on my website under the 4Cs framework tab. There's the QR code, and my website is at the bottom. So Brian, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you for your time, and thanks for the opportunity to talk with this. And Alex, thanks for being my partner in crime through this, and for doing things the right way. Appreciate it.
Thank you both. Very concise and clear, and actually very instructive. Audience, just to let you know how interactive and rewarding these sessions can be, Mary Lou, Alex wasn't on the last one, but she was an audience member like you. And in one of the past roundtables, we were discussing the challenges as we were wrapping up the year, and she briefly alluded to this framework. So we invited her to share it on a wider stage with you all. So thank you, Mary Lou and Alex. I was going to ask, what are some of the KPIs we should be tracking from a comms perspective, not just change implementation from the C-suite, but a change comms perspective? And part B, a question came in from Rebecca, which I think goes to answering this. I'm curious, she asked if there was any post-implementation survey to see how the transition was perceived by employees. So can you address that big imbroglio of measuring your comms output to see how effective the comms around change initiatives is?
Yeah, so just to start there, we have a series of, when I was at Bayer, we had a series of different tools that we could use to do quick polls to engage with our employees and with our leaders around how things are going. So we use those tools. Some of them are just like our online intranet tools and things of that nature. But we also had a very strong relationship with, and I'll make a triangle, the change team, communications team, and HR. So a lot of the KPIs that we had were really around, let's make sure. One of the biggest concerns we had was the noise externally. Like, we worked very closely with our partners who handle reputation and media to stay on top of what are the questions, what are we seeing, what's the social media flow. So we worked very closely with them. So some of the parameters that we have around how we track reputation and engagement and understanding, we were using groups like Morning Consult and things of that nature to help us track how the communications messages that were going externally were being used. Internally, you don't have as many tools as that. So a lot of it was anecdotal. Alex, I don't believe we did specific surveys.
We didn't do a formal survey, no.
But we did have constant feedback with those change comms and HR team meetings. And when I think of KPIs, I think of, did people understand the message? Did they, and then literally, how did the site closures go? There were a number of milestones for different groups, and things were getting chipped away piece by piece, but we were watching those along the way. We didn't come into this with, let's have 5 key KPIs. It was more principle based and strategic based, but we did have tools where we could measure things of those natures. Right. And we did use them when we could.
Got it. Yeah, pulse surveys are probably the best way to go around that. And when you're setting up your goals around the change comms outputs, you're going to want to attach how to prove and show success, likely.
Yeah.
When you're coming up
and exit interviews was another key input part that we could gather from HR, and we could watch sort of trends about how that was going. Because remember, both of these had long tail lives. They were 18-month and 2-year projects. And then the pandemic came in the middle of it on both of them. So we weren't even on site as much. We did how to do a lot of things, obviously, virtually.
I really like this question from Madeline. Any advice for executive buy-in around certain strategies? For example, the courage one that requires executive buy-in and C-suite is if a best practice is X, but they saw another CEO do Y, what happens if they want to do that instead of follow your protocols or your messaging or your approach? Thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I just a very, very quick story. Just before the day that I found out about this particular change in Robinson was just a few days before the Christmas holiday break or the holiday break. And I happened to see Phil, our president, standing at his desk. I was standing at mine. I'm like, let me go say hello and just mention to him that I found out about this Robinson site. And I had a feeling that this was going to be one of the most difficult things we were going to have to do as a company for many of the reasons that we described. So when we chatted about it, he suggested to me, hey, let's go do what they just did in Berkeley a couple of months ago. They announced 200 jobs were being cut. And I said, well, Phil, that's different. This is under the vise of speak truth to leadership. And I said, well, I have all that material. They did a great job. I said, but this is different. This is not about a portfolio change, which is what was happening in that production site. They were hemophilia drug production site, and they were actually going to be expanding, putting several $100 million into that facility on gene therapy. Well, guess what? This is not the same thing at all. This is the first of many to come, likely, of changes that are going to impact jobs as a result of this integration that a lot of people still don't understand why we made that decision. So when you say that, he looked out the window and he was like, oh gosh, you're right. This one's different. So I think that it's incumbent upon us to make sure that our leaders understand the framework that employees' voices are coming from, because they're thinking, high level strategic, we made a decision, go make it happen. But I think the difference here is what's most important. We do not want our employees to go to the media and give us any other reason to bash Bayer for anything. Let's remember who we are. Let's go to our values and our principles, and let's remember how we do this, and we do it the right way. But you have to have the courage to stand up to that, because if you don't, then you're going to become more of an order taker and not a trusted advisor. And that's what we want to be as communications professionals, trusted advisors.